Hi, I'm Kara. This is Really Famous, where you get to know your favorite celebrities on an intimate level because I was a therapist and that's just how I roll. Right now, you are going to get to know Peggy Rowe. That's right, Mike Rowe's mother and a celebrity in and of herself. This is part one where she talks about how she became famous, having a famous son, and life at the home. In part two, we talk about a lot more. She reveals some things she has never revealed in public. And we also analyze Mike. So let's go. Part one starts now. So you look like you have a good setup over here. Like you're a Zoomer. It looks like you Zoom
I've
regularly.
zoomed quite a bit. Yeah, my book came out during the pandemic, so my second book.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of book events via Zoom.
So how was that? Did you like doing them via Zoom instead of in person?
Well, there is an advantage. You don't have to wait in airports or train stations and get in and out of cars, but um, there's no substitute for real people, live people in the audiences. It's wonderful. You can
For sure.
you can interact, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the disadvantage of zooming, but being able to stay in your home and just dress from the waist up, that is an
That's
advantage.
nice. I know. I did these via Zoom, these interviews when the pandemic started, and I did it the whole time. And then I just started doing them in person again because before the pandemic, I only did them in person. I was like, no phone recordings, no Zoom recordings. I really like to interact, but I had no choice. So I pivoted and I learned how to do the Zoom, and I'm grateful that I got to. But then when I started to see people again, it was like, oh, I do remember how nice it is to actually be face to face. I mean, we're face to face now, but I would rather be in a
Yeah.
room with you. I can't lie.
Oh yeah, that's better always.
Yeah.
And I did I guess my largest Zoom event this year was about 850 people. I did a keynote at the Irma Bombeck conference back
That's
in,
fun.
I don't even know, but it was supposed to be April, but it wasn't. Um, and knowing that there are all those people out there, it just made me sad that I couldn't really see them,
Sure, sure.
just talk to them.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, so I met your son through Zoom. You are welcome to the show. You are here for like high demand. All of Mike's fans who saw our interview on my show, they were all like, "What about Peggy? You have to have Peggy on the show." They really
Oh,
high demand. So I thought that's a really great idea. So
isn't
welcome.
that nice to hear? We do a lot of things together. We do some videos together, and we interact on his podcast, so
Yes.
people are familiar with me. And I've written texts to him, which he has shared on his Facebook page. I've written stories, which he has shared, and which have been most appreciated. And that's very, makes you feel good. So they do know that.
They definitely do. And I heard you on his podcast once. It was great. I think I forget exactly what you were talking about, but you were like being honest with him about something that he had done. I wish I had remembered exactly what it was, but you were kind of saying, well, Mike, it's not, I really don't think you should have done that. And it was just such a great, authentic mother son
Oh,
conversation.
yeah. Yeah. He gets a little specific sometimes. And when it comes to personal things, I kind of talk around it.
Uh huh.
And also, his audience is different from my audience. My audience is largely, I have hundreds of thousands of viewers. That's wonderful, and followers. But they tend to be more of a certain age and female. I do have some men, but I have a lot of women my age and younger. Whereas Mike has a lot of men. Yeah, and men are a little bit different,
Yeah, but I
but
have to say, I've seen
they're
a
a
lot
different
of
audience.
Yeah, but I've seen a lot of women. I think when Mike was booked on my show before I had actually met him and talked to him, I did a little bit of research and I went onto Facebook. That was one of the first things I did to see, well, like, okay, so who are his fans and who is his audience? And I went into a few of his fan groups, and there were plenty of women too. I didn't find it to be mostly men, but I wonder if that's because it's specifically a Facebook part of his audience. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if that's why. But I did see a lot of women too, men and women.
I've done personal appearances with him. We did one a couple of years ago in Baltimore, and there were just under 1,000 people there. And I would say that it was split, maybe even more women. But there were, I mean, men were well represented, but there were a lot of
Okay.
women there too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think everybody seems to relate to him as like, I guess he's a man's man and a what a woman likes to see in a man too, which is why, I guess he attracts both. But it is interesting. I do think now that you mention it, when I put it out there in their Facebook group, I do think a lot of women were like, Peggy, 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 we want more Peggy. So I guess that's your heavy audience. They look up to you, I'm sure, as an inspiration, especially from your writing.
I was not on social media until my first book came out in 2018, and my publisher, Forefront and Simon and Schuster, insisted that I have a social media presence because nowadays it's the only way to sell books, I guess. Um, I hated it in the beginning. Oh, it was like feeding the beast every other day. I would write a couple of hundred words 2 or 3 times a week. And, it got easier and easier. And my followers are wonderful. They're just the sweetest people. And I've learned a lot from them. They've taught me more about human nature than I've learned in 83 years. Um, I've learned that people like something uplifting, something positive. Uh, and they like me naughty every once in a while too. I take them to the edge, but I don't go over.
That's interesting. So you realize that that's something that they like it occasionally, as long as
They
it's
do.
not too far.
They do. There was a story in my second book called The Old Gray Pair. And in it, it's just a couple of paragraphs. You want me to read it? Or would you rather
Sure.
I just tell you about it? Let's see. It's in my second book called
Yes.
About Your Father. And it's a few pages long, but I'm just going to read you this couple of paragraphs at the end. One evening after dinner, my husband and I were hugging in the kitchen when our visiting son wrapped his arms around us and lifted us off the floor, saying, "You guys are adorable." I wondered what he would have said if he'd seen us at bedtime. "Do you have the stuff?" John asked me as I got into bed. "Of course," I said. "You do me first." "Uh-uh. You know how you are. You get too steamy. You do me first." "All right, but you better hadn't fall asleep," I warned him. I love to hear his groans of ecstasy as I do my thing. Nothing relieves my husband's itchy back like cortisone cream. And what he said about me is true. Bengay on my shoulders and neck can produce too much heat if he's not careful. John knows what I like. So, I mean, they just loved that. I took them to the edge, but I did not go over the edge.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
That's a perfect balance. That is so funny. And right, something's going on. So
Yeah.
it's so interesting. So you were always a writer though, right? You kind of got into it more recently, but yes?
Yes. In fact, this is what my third book is going to be about. I've always loved writing. And I really started years ago when I was fresh out of college and teaching. And I would use poetry to introduce new units or to introduce vocabulary. And the kids loved it. And they taught me that I could write poetry. Um, and when I noticed that they were memorizing my poetry and using it for jump rope rhymes, it was it was great. Um, and I just continued writing. Eventually, uh, publishing in stories in newspapers and magazines, articles and stories.
Hmm.
My trademark is humor. I love humor, and that's where I usually go.
Yeah, how interesting. So, I have so many things I want to ask you about, but a lot of people do want to know about your third book. So, where are you in the process? And you said it's about, what is it about? Your writing process, or like how you got to this point?
How I got to this point, actually, how I began writing and how I eventually became a New York Times bestseller twice. Um, it was a long process and it took many years. I started writing in my 20s, and I did not publish my first book until I was 80 in 2018. And my second book when I was 82 in 2020. In my third book is about the process of writing and my process of writing in particular. I'm about 2/3 finished. I just sent my first 11 chapters off to my editor, who is a friend and local writer, and she's a great editor. And of course, it will be edited again when it goes to the publisher. I love writing. You know, if you're a writer, you just cannot not write. Everything is material. It just falls into your lap. And no matter what the situation is, what you observe, you see it as a writer, and you think to yourself, what's going to be the best way to portray this? And that's me. I get up in the middle of the night because something comes to me, a plot or a story or dialogue, and I have to write it down or I won't go back to sleep. I take notes in church. My husband accused me one day of writing on the bulletin during the Lord's Prayer. That might or might not have been true, but yeah, I do. Everything is material.
Yeah, and I see even when you're on your Facebook, I guess you call it call it a page, a blog. I don't know what you call it, but on your Facebook page, I guess, your writing really comes through, and it seems like you're enjoying yourself as you are putting something in there. And I see you also coming back to your followers too. Well, they comment on it, you say something back. I mean, you're very responsive as well. So I do get that vibe from you that you for sure really enjoy that whole exchange.
You know, when I said before that I've learned a lot from my followers, that's so true. And when they say things to me like, oh, Peggy, I keep your book by my bedside. And if I've had a bad day and I think I'm not going to be able to sleep, I'll read a chapter of your book. Or I will read your current post, and it puts me in such a good place that I'm able to go to sleep. A woman said to me one time, my grandson died about 10 months ago. And I have not smiled in that time until I picked up your book.
Wow.
I could tear up thinking about it, but when you know that you affect people in that way, you want to just be there for them and you want to give them more. So I try to produce things that they will like.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. It's really a win-win. It helps everybody. Helps you. It's an outlet for you. You feel good. You're connecting with people, and they're really getting that, like you're saying, that inspiration or that positivity that they really need. So I think that's wonderful. And so I guess so. How interesting was it for you to become famous in your own right? I mean, I don't know how you feel about. Do you feel like you're famous? Do you feel like yes, people recognize you, they know you? How do you feel about that?
I don't really like to be famous, and I don't
Uh huh.
really like to be recognized. I like for people to love my work. That's, that's my goal. I want to give them writing that they can relate to and appreciate and enjoy, something that makes them laugh, hopefully. But as far as from time to time, people will say, I love you. You are just, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I don't want to be loved. I want them to love my writing.
So you don't want to be loved by people you don't know? Is that because I'm sure you would like to be loved by your family, let's say, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
So it's a little weird to be loved by people who you've never even met, I guess.
right. I don't want to be on a pedestal, and I don't want them to have expectations of me that I cannot fulfill. I'm very human. I have my faults like everybody else. And so I don't want to be thought of as some kind of a a role model, because I don't believe I am. Just like my writing.
But I think you are, though.
It's funny. I guess you can't really escape it if you're a public figure, and I'm not. You know, I think of myself sometimes. I will go onto my Facebook page and I'll see, oh wow, I have 200,000 people read this, and I've got like 25,000 comments, and I think, wow. And then I'll go to Mike's Facebook page, and he's got 6 million people read this, and hundreds of thousands of people have commented, and I think you're small time, small time.
It's all relative, I guess. Relative in two
Indeed,
ways.
in two ways, indeed it is. Yeah.
Right. So as Mike brought you kind of into the spotlight, that what was that process like for you? So I guess at some point, right, you didn't have people didn't recognize you as Mike's mother, but then I guess as he became more public, you did along with him, right?
Mike was public long before I was public. As a matter of fact, I would not be where I am as a writer were it not for Mike. Mike was successful in television. He calls himself a B-list celebrity, but I think he might be a little bit more. And he had a social media presence. And one day I wrote a text to him. It was a humorous text, and it was meant for him, but he read it on his Facebook page. And I mean, millions of people read it and enjoyed it. And he said, "Hey, Mom, I think we might be onto something here." Now, this is before I was published. I had certainly been published in newspapers and magazines, but before I had written a book. He said, "I think we're onto something here. Write me another one when you get time, maybe next week." And I did, and they loved it. It was humorous. And so often my husband is my foil. He's just great material. And so Mike said, "Write me a story." And so I did. I wrote him a story about our funeral home experiences. And people related and reacted. And then one day something awful happened to me. I went to Walmart. I had a terrible experience. I left my purse hanging on the handle of a shopping cart in the parking lot. And I came home and I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I've never lost anything before. My life was in that purse, my phone, all of my wallet, all of my credit cards, everything was in there. I was just sick about it. So, of course, I told my husband, reacted, and then I called the children because I like to share my misery with my children. And I called Mike, and he said, "Mom, don't tell me about it. Don't tell me about it. Sit down, write about it. Send it to me." So I did. I sat down and wrote about it. And it's a story called Old Blue. That was my name for my purse. And pure humor, maybe about between 1,500 and 2,000 words, maybe closer to 1,500. And I sent it to him. Well, what does he do? He makes a video and reads it on social media. And then he went off and did a job somewhere, a recording or filmed something. When he came back, it had had 70 million views. And he said, "Holy cow," or something similar. Well, publishers read it and called him and said, "Mike, if you could get your mother to write maybe 20 of those stories, similar stories, we'll publish it. We'll put it in a book and publish it." So I did. I wrote a book, but it wasn't that kind of book. It was a book that had been in my head for some years, and I just needed to get it out. It was a book called About My Mother, and it was about a mother and daughter who had absolutely nothing in common. it's full of humor. And publisher said, no thanks. Nobody knows, told Mike, no thanks, Mike. Nobody knows your mother. Nobody knows your grandmother. It would be a hard sell. So Mike had read it and really liked it. And so he published it. He self-published it, put it on eBay and sold 10,000 copies in no time at all. So then the big publishing houses came calling and they said, well, maybe your mother does have something to say and maybe she does know how to say it. So they picked it up and published it.
Yeah, that's great. They like to see, right? The publishing companies, all of the big companies now, they want to see and be assured that they can sell whatever it is before they give a green light. That's why all the Marvel movies are so popular.
Yeah. And celebrity sells. And that's why they wanted me to write a book about Mike. They thought my stories would be about Mike, but of course they weren't. Right. So, yeah. And that's how my book was published. And the publishers liked the success of it and said, write another one. So I did. And that one did well also.
That's so great. And it's the same publisher this time around, the third book?
Oh, yes. In fact, I talked to him a couple of months ago and I said, so I'm doing my third book. I said, are you interested? And he just laughed. Jonathan Merck is his name. He just laughed. He said, Peggy, I'll take this book. I'll take your next book. I'll take your next book and I'll take your next book. You know, publishers are so funny. Talk about optimism. I had publishers in the beginning offer me a 3-book deal. I was 80. And I thought, oh my goodness, how old am I going to be if I do 3 books, you know? But they were very optimistic. So
well, yeah, here you go. You're doing it.
There you go. I am. There is going to be a third book, and I think I'm going to live to see it finished.
Yeah. So optimistic or realistic, choose your word. But I would say realistic.
Exactly.
It's so funny. I feel like in the way that you talk and the way Mike talks, they're very similar. Like you have a similar cadence, a similar speaking style. Do you find that? Do you realize that?
Well, I find that a compliment. Thank you very much. Yeah. No, I never noticed it before, that we were similar in our approach to speech. No, our writing is somewhat similar, although Mike is so much, when I say so much better, I mean, he just has a wonderful way of expressing himself and people can relate to it. And my husband and I, and I'll get back to this, I'm working my way back to this, but my husband and I recently moved into a retirement home, a senior living facility. And in my blog, in my stories, I call it the home. People love my stories about the home. And here at the home, with so many people, I'm not Peggy Rowe. We wear lanyards around our neck because they have a chip in them and they open all the doors here. This is a large facility. So I always wear my lanyard and it has my name on it. And I can't tell you how many dozens and dozens of people have come up to me and said, hi, Mike Rowe's mom. The word is out. They know I'm here and they know who my son is. And I just am always amazed at how people feel about him, how they love him.
They love
how
him.
They just can't get enough of him. And so he has agreed to come here and do a Q&A or a speech or interact with me in some way. So
that's so nice. They'll love that. And then it'll be both of you. But I have found the same thing with Mike too. That was one of the things I discovered. And of course I had known about Mike before we set up our interview. But as I said, when I started to do a little bit more research, I can really see so many people really adore him, like you're saying. And I've interviewed so many celebrities. I mean, many, many, many over the years. And I can probably pick out about 10 that seem to have the most passionate fans. And I would put Mike as one of those top 10 out of, well over 100 that I've interviewed. So there's something about his relatability, and I think that you have the same thing, and obviously he gets it from you, or at least some of it from you. It's funny, when I was saying that you have a similar cadence too, you also, I was realizing as you were telling the story about the home and your lanyard, you have a similar storytelling as well. I think you and I noticed that when I talk to Mike over Zoom, like I'm talking to you, and I think in your writing and his writing, same thing. You are both storytellers. You have a way of engaging the reader or the listener, and then it's paced in such a way that there's something coming. There's a reward at the end. I think that's both of your style.
A reveal at the least.
Yes, a reveal,
Yes.
exactly. So that's so interesting. So, all right. So, what was your family like growing up? You have three sons, right?
Yes, we have three sons. Mike is the oldest. He's 59. It's
And
no
what was
secret.
yeah? Everybody knows. Well, he's so public, right? So, what were each of their personalities? What was the family dynamic? Paint me a picture.
Oh, they were so different. They were night and day. As the oldest, Mike was very, very outgoing, very goal oriented, accomplished a lot in school. But that's not how he started out. He was very shy as a child, extremely shy. In fact, and I tell this in stories in my books, someone would knock at the door and Mike would dive under the table or into the hall closet. He didn't want anybody to look at him as a child, just so very shy. He's changed a little. Also, he was a neat freak. He would not play in mud like other kids or even walk through a mud puddle. He would not play with Play-Doh. It was icky. Didn't want to touch it. He wouldn't finger paint. He was just very much a neat freak. And that changed also. If you've seen Dirty Jobs, you know.
I think that's common with children, though. A lot of kids, I think, have that kind of lack of a desire to touch things that are dirty, right? They don't want finger painting. I think that is pretty common. There's like I don't know, a large percentage of kids who just aren't interested in that. It doesn't feel comfortable. Doesn't mean they're not going to outgrow it, I guess.
Right. And he
Right.
certainly did. He certainly did. Yeah.
Okay.
He put his father and me through a lot as an adult.
As an adult, what do you mean? Like what?
Well, when he was in high school, I can remember my husband saying to him, "All right, Mike, so what do you think you'd like to do with the rest of your life? How do you see yourself in the future?" And Mike said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I feel like whatever I do, it's going to be in front of a lot of people." And my husband said to him, "Well, whatever you decide, you'll have our support." Well, be careful what you promise your children, because we had to skip church on Sundays. I would skip church on Sundays so that I could watch him as the host of a real estate show. I just loved it.
You
And then
did.
some years, oh yeah, nobody I knew was on television, and I just thought and he was very popular. It was a very popular show. And then in the mid '80s, he was he got a job with the Baltimore Opera, singing with the Baltimore Opera. And so we went to the opera. We went to the opera a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with opera, but operas last 3 hours. And if it's a Wagnerian opera, it can last 5 hours. So I never missed an opera. John might have missed one or two. Yeah.
But you
And
kind of
then,
liked going on that adventure,
oh
supporting
yes,
him.
and
Yeah.
oh yeah, and seeing your kid on the stage with really famous opera singers. Well, it was wonderful. We just thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. My mother thoroughly enjoyed it. And then we turn on the TV, and there's Mike selling everything from Diamonique jewelry to Tefal cookware, to collectible dolls on QVC in the middle of the night. So I would set my alarm for the middle of the night, the wee hours of the morning, and I would get up and watch Mike sell things on QVC. I saw him one night, he burned himself while cooking an omelet on Tefal cookware. Another night, he fell asleep. He was advertising. He was advertising bedding, and he was lying on a mattress with a soft duvet, and he was saying something like, "Oh, it really is so comfortable." And the next thing I know, his eyes are closed. He denied it, but he did fall asleep before millions of people. He had a cult following on QVC. Yeah. And then just, oh my goodness, I was there the Sunday afternoon when Mike told millions of children that there was no Santa Claus. He didn't come right out and say it just like that, but that was the bottom line. And he was fired several times from QVC, as I recall.
Right, so what exactly happened? What did he say?
Something to the effect of, he was talking with someone, callers would call in and talk about the product. And it was during an hour of toys. And someone was calling in about a toy truck or something. And Mike said, "Oh, yeah, well, how old were you when you found out there was no Santa Claus?" "I think I was about 10. Well, I mean, all these children are watching, and Mike just didn't have a clue. And I thought, holy cow, this is it. And he was fired after that. But he came back because he was very popular. He was had a cult following on the West Coast in the middle of the night. And then just when you think you've seen it all, you get to turn on the television and see your son sloshing through sewers and, oh my golly, just doing horrible things on dirty jobs.
Yeah. I guess it's really cool to be able to have those opportunities to see your child doing things, which a lot of parents don't really ever get to do, right? Even if you are close with your grown children and you see them regularly, you don't necessarily see them in their job. You don't see them in their element that has nothing to do with your family. So that's really a privilege, I would think, in a way, to be able to see him all these years in these different roles.
It certainly was. It was like having a front row seat and take your parents to work day. We were right there with him on the job, and while it wasn't always pleasant. And there were times when I closed my eyes, like when he was swimming with sharks and sexing alligators and stuff like that.
Right.
Not plus everything good to watch.
Yeah. Plus, there's also the alternative side, the less exciting side, or maybe it is, whatever, it's not very relaxing, is the stalkers. I remember he told me about that too, that he's had some stalkers over the years. And I imagine that would be difficult even for you to know is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of his stalkers has discovered us, and that's a little bit scary, and that's been going on for some years, and police and FBI are involved, and I've never really felt fearful, never really felt afraid. I just find it very annoying, but I know that it happens, and he has stayed safe, and Mike is pretty much protected when he goes in public.
Right. But it's that, and I remember we talked about that too, is that it's that fine line between, I think what people really appreciate is how they can relate to you because you're so real. It's your real personality, yours and his, same thing coming through. Mm-hmm. So you're not actors who play other people, like you're showing your real selves, and that's something that people appreciate and relate to. But that's, I guess, the drawback of it is there will be, one out of millions who takes it too far.
Right. There are people who go over the line. They don't appreciate boundaries. In fact, we did an event one evening, Mike and I together, and there was a large audience. And afterwards, there was a Q&A, people asked questions and we answered, and it was really delightful. And then at the end, we were escorted to the green room. And there was this one woman who just didn't leave us alone. She just was right with us every second. And when we went into the green room, she was asked to remain outside. And so the person taking care of us made us comfortable in the green room, and then she had to go off and do something else. Well, this person opened the door and came in and wanted my address and my phone number. And my husband said to her, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is inappropriate. You have to leave right now." And she did. But people, they don't understand boundaries sometimes. Most people do.
Yeah.
99% of the people do.
Right.
And
But I
they're
think,
great.
yeah, there's something about seeing, I think maybe seeing you in person, but especially on TV as well, that makes them think they know you, I guess, beyond, like
Mhm.
it's a strange phenomenon, but I think it's so common. There must be something, some reason why there's that familiarity there, and they just don't have the boundaries. They don't think that they exist or something.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Michael experiences this all the time because Michael is so relatable. The Mike Rowe you see on television is the Mike Rowe I see when he comes to visit. He is what he seems. I mean, you get what you see with Mike. And I've had people, friends of his from high school, tell me, "Oh my gosh, Mike's just like he was in high school." He acts exactly the same way, same personality, that he was in high school. So he is who he is, and
Yeah. Yeah,
people
and
relate.
you exactly. People relate, they feel it, they sense it, they see it, they love it, and they feel like they know
Yeah,
him, which is great. I
right.
mean, that's what you want, and that's why he's so successful, I'm sure.
Hmm.
People, a lot of the questions people had that they wanted from me when I was interviewing Mike was, we don't know much about his, personal life. Is he ever going to get married? Is he ever going to have kids? And Mike and I did talk about that. I asked him about all of that. And I went into these Facebook groups before talking to you, and they had a similar question for you, which is, what do you think about, do you want Mike to get married and have kids? What do you think about all of that situation? Wait, there's more. To see what Peggy says next, tune in to part 2. I put a link in the description below. In part 2, Peggy reveals some things about herself and about her son Mike and her family, and what people think about her and how it's different from who she really is. All that and more. She talks about things that she's never revealed before. Stay tuned for part 2 with Peggy Rowe. Pick up a copy of Peggy's books, pick up a copy of Mike's books, catch my big, juicy, and very personal interview with Mike, and stay tuned for part 2 with Peggy Rowe. There are links to everything in the description. Drop a comment, I read them, I'd love to hear what you think. Drop a like if you like this video, and make sure you're subscribed for more real talks, intimate talks, and surprising talks with your favorite celebrities. I'm Kara, see you next time.